This is Curious, the podcast where I ask questions to people who know more than I do. I'm the host, Dan Alber, and today my guest is a mother-daughter duo from Nashville, Tennessee, Terra and Gracie Tucker. Terra is a pastoral care, marriage, and family therapist and the creator of the Generational Blessings Study Program, and Gracie is her daughter. Today, I'm curious to explore what makes family relationships thrive. Terra and Gracie, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
My first question is, can you just tell us the distinction of the pastoral care title?
Okay, I can. In 2008, I graduated from Trevecca in Nashville with a master's in marriage and family therapy. And so I am a marriage and family therapist as far as the education. And I worked with a church very closely for about 8 years, so I was always more bent towards ministry. Then later on, I had a friend who asked me if I wanted to help her assist in teaching a biblical ethics course for Lipscomb University. And so I went with her into the Tennessee State Prison for Women, which is now the Deborah K. Rehabilitation Center for Women. But Lipscomb was offering just basic classes, and she was going to teach biblical ethics, so I helped her with that. Then years later, volunteered for about 4 years, and then those inmates were going to have to go back into their cells on Wednesday nights. And Lipscomb decided, let's give them a master's degree. Let's offer that. And none of the other different colleges, like the School of Business, didn't feel comfortable with it. They just didn't know that was what they wanted to provide. But the Bible School of Theology took it, and it's a Hazlitt School of Theology. And so they said, let's give a master's in like pastoral care so the inmates can care for each other. And after volunteering on Wednesday nights for about 4 years, I was like, okay, I kind of like to do that since I already worked closely with a church and have been in ministry for years. And so I sat side by side with inmates and outside students and was able to get a master's in Christian ministry, I think is what it's called, with an emphasis in pastoral care. And so in combining the two masters, I ended up, because I always pray before every session, I ask the Holy Spirit to be the counselor. Well, you can't do that and have a state license in Tennessee. Like, that's just, and it's understandable. No one needs religion pushed on them, but it's so much a part of who I am that I couldn't do it without praying that prayer. Not that there aren't plenty of counselors who do a wonderful job, and you don't have to pray that prayer beforehand, and the Holy Spirit works through counseling and all those different things. God's always at work, but it was just the way that I did it. And so in attaining that pastoral care emphasis with the masters, later it got ordained into, being a pastor, that kind of thing. And people kept coming to me wanting counseling. And I was like, okay, I can't do it and have a state license, but I can do it as a pastor and not charge. For that I don't charge, and combine the two. And so I just combined the pastoral care with the marriage and family therapy. And so I use real marriage and family therapy techniques, theories, the ethics of that, the confidentiality, all those things. I only use the things I can filter through Scripture. I pray beforehand, and I have the training of both a pastoral care minister and a marriage and family therapist. So it's just me using all of it.
And then can you also tell me the distinction between therapy and counseling?
Yes. Counseling, well, all therapy, all counseling, whether it be pastoral, the different types of counseling, all of it's counseling. All of it's counsel, and we all need some counsel. A marriage and family therapist are using therapeutic theories, such as cognitive therapy theory, and I think in other counseling they do also. A marriage and family therapist also, like I'm a systems therapist, Bowen's work. I look at family systems, I look at genograms, I look at how does A affect B and C and just the whole picture, and it's almost like I'm doing a puzzle. And so in that therapeutic process, it's a little more than just the counseling, which a lot of listening, a lot of cognitive therapy, changing how we view things, how we see things, and then how we behave. But I also do the systems therapy. Really, the difference is there's not much of one. It's just different things people call themselves, honestly. And marriage and family therapist, there are also different kinds of therapists out there and different types of counseling. And then you add the pastoral, that's a pastor who does some counseling. And so just different words, honestly.
I assumed so. And then my last question is, are you exclusively working with couples, families, or is it sometimes one-on-one as well?
It is everything.
Okay.
It's often one-on-one. I do a ton of premaritals. I do work with couples often. I'm trained to also, as a marriage and family therapist, I'm trained to work with the entire family, which is just a hoot. It's just more individuals coming in. And I see plenty of individuals. I don't work with children because that affects me. I could. I had the same classes that others who do specialize in that. But therapists kind of figure out what their niche is. Mine is more family systems and those type things, those type relationships, and then also individuals, because if one individual changes, the family system changes because one has changed. But children, I didn't sleep well when I did the practice with children, and I was like, okay, that's not my thing, because that I carry on my heart. The rest I can walk away from.
This is great because this gets me to something I really want to know about, which is, have you worked in this the entirety of Gracie's life?
No. I went back to school when Gracie was in elementary school to be a therapist.
Okay.
And so her teens, yes, she grew up with Mom, the church counselor. Okay. And so she just kind of always grew up knowing she knows nothing, and they don't.
It'll make you a vault. I'm like, never seen you before.
Yes, but people will walk up to Gracie and say, oh, your mom, I saw her in this and this year and this happened.
Right.
And she has no clue because, a therapist is confidential.
Yes.
And just by ethics, and I always look at myself and go, oh, and I answer to God. You add the pastoral care on top of it. And then there's that in trusting that God's trusted me with people. So my kids know nothing, but Gracie grew up from middle school through high school with her mom being a therapist. Okay. Yeah.
You can shut this down at any point you want here, any point you're uncomfortable. But I just want to know, first for you, what it's like or how you are both a parent, like how you show up to work as a counselor and then also come home as a parent and without analyzing and bringing your work home. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. Here's the thing with the way that I do it.
Okay.
I think it is such a God thing that they're completely separate. Cool. Now, to me, if I'm not living what it is that I'm doing, then I need to go home and not do it. So they come first. Okay. That's always been my boundary, is they get their mom. If they don't get their mom, then why am I being a marriage and family therapist? If it just doesn't equate. And so somehow the prayer of asking the Holy Spirit, which I do, to be the counselor, I walk away from it like it has to be a God thing, because I've heard people say, how do you carry that? And I've heard people burn out and say, I can't carry that. I leave it in the room because God's always at work. They belong to God, whoever I'm sitting with. God will be at work between now and the next time I see them, and we'll pick right back up and join God in that work when we get back together. And so, and when I go home, I just had it. Now, some days I'm tired, and I'll just kind of go to bed early or fall asleep. And I used to get really zapped when I worked with the church because
I can imagine
it would be exhausting. So sometimes I would be asleep at 8 o'clock. Yeah. But to me, when I'm with them, they come first. And first God, then family, and then this is just the work that God helps me partner with.
Okay.
I hope they've always felt like they come first, and that I was able to separate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and how about for you? And again, this will be edited. So if you're not comfortable with this, but what is that experience like?
Having a mom
for
as a
you
counselor?
As a daughter? Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so my experience, one, she's telling the total truth when she's like, my family comes first, because even like she's a grandma now, and so with her grandkids, she's like the shining grandma of the world. They do no wrong, and they have a party every time they're there.
Amazing.
But she really does put that first. So like if the kids need a babysitter or something, she pushes. You just made sure that you had your priorities right. And when you say your family's first, because you can't go and talk about families and have your family secretly hate you.
Sure.
Which I feel like sometimes if you're so career focused or something, usually, things can just slip away if you're not intentional. So you've done that in a really great way. Yeah, you really have.
Good.
And then having a mom as a therapist, I think has been very beneficial for me.
Yeah, cool.
Because just being around somebody who's learning that stuff and lives that way too, but also I love that this podcast is curious because I try to be curious in my life. So I'm always asking her like, okay, if I want to have good relationships with people, like what's a boundary? What do I need to do? So I've had like free therapy my entire life.
Yeah, right.
But even so, I'll do this, and then my dad will do this too. But having been around her and lived with her, you just get a lot of wisdom from the things, one, who she is, and then two, what she's learned and been in school learning. And so I'll catch myself saying these sentences or behaving in certain ways where I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm like emotionally intelligent. Would somebody who is even say that? Probably not. That'll tell you where I am on the spectrum for that. But yeah, I feel like it's been super beneficial because, yeah, and there have been moments where growing up, she'd ask me questions and I'd be like, don't counsel me, like you're picking all the right.
Totally.
Like you're smart and I can tell that you're asking me how I feel in an indirect way so that I can figure it out. But as I've gotten older and grown up, it's been helpful because there have been times where I'm like, I needed counsel and I needed like therapy in ways where I've had, adult situations I didn't know how to deal with. And having someone in my life who is a therapist and also loves God and has wisdom has like benefited me in a huge way.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing.
Yeah. And I always say, because I'm pro therapy, but if I didn't have a mom as a therapist, I would really need a therapist. I would be so broke.
Oh my good, that's so. But a therapist really just asks questions.
Yeah,
that's really all I'm doing. And I always felt so humbled that I got to go to school and I was able to learn what I was able to learn. And I always thought other people are smart. They can learn those things. They can benefit. But really, it's just asking good questions. And then the benefit with the way that I do it is knowing that God has the answers, that you're going to have your answers. You're walking with Jesus. He's going to give you your answers. And he loves you more than I do. And whoever I'm sitting with, he loves them more than I do. And so just asking a lot of questions is half of therapy.
Okay.
And
listening.
Yeah. That is what sometimes bothers me. You're like, why do you think that? I'm like,
Do you remember when I used to ask, y'all would come home from school and I'd be like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how was your day? and her oldest brother, he would always say oldest brother. She just has one brother, but he's older.
Yeah.
But he would say 10, Mom, 10. It was a 10, because he was in high school.
We don't
and
want
I'm
to go
like,
through
okay,
this.
what would make it an 11? and all the kids would be like, no, Mom, don't do that to me. And
Right.
so
and you did have your little like mom
I was
tricks.
still learning, yes.
This isn't probably therapy. This is probably just a mom trick. But I've heard her actually say it. She was speaking at a Mom Life event, and I didn't realize it was a trick till right then when I was watching her, and I was like, oh. But she would like drive us
I knew you were
around
going to say that.
and get us in the car before we could drive and take the longest way ever anywhere and be like, so how are you feeling?
Okay.
Like a extra 45-minute drive where I'm like, where are we going?
Yes, I stand by that
Yeah.
to mothers. I'm like, take the long way home. If they're not very talkative, take the long way home.
Yeah.
Unless somebody has to go to the bathroom.
That's a mom trick. That's
Do you
a
think
mom
this
trick.
works because you hit this certain amount of time where it's like, okay, I'll just tell you what's going on so we can get home? Or
No.
why do you think that works?
I think it just takes a minute sometimes to get them talking and for them to realize you're really listening. And I mean, it could also be called entrapment, as far as you're trapped in the car. That would be a different, and that's not a theory, and that's not any kind of therapeutic technique. But for us, it worked. It gave us just a little time, just us, for me to ask some questions, for her not to be thinking about the next thing she was going to be doing,
Right.
and to just be sitting in the car. And I like a good country drive.
Totally.
See, that's your perspective. I'm with Dan on this, where I'm like, there was a line where, you're trying to be okay or you don't want to tell your parents what went on that day. Then you're like 20 minutes in, you're like, well, the silence, and then you're thinking about it. You're like, I may as well just do it. Like, actually, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm. Still worked. Still worked.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I heard you say this earlier. If one person changes, the system changes?
Yes.
Can you expound on that a little bit?
Oh, I'd love to. With marriage and family therapy, often someone will come in and they'll say, with knowing that I'm a family therapist, they'll say, I want to change, but no one else wants to change. Or I want to change, but I can't get my husband to change. Or I want to change, but I don't know how this will affect anything in my life. And what has been proven is that when one person changes, there are ripple effects. And everything shifts just a little bit, kind of like a jar of marbles. If you drop one marble in, everything shifts just the tiny bit. And so one person's change affects everyone else that they deeply care about. And it's not your responsibility to change the entire system, but we're shaped by our family of origins. That just means the family that we are born into, their belief systems, the way that they live, what they think, whether they have faith or not, all of those things shape who we are. Their positive aspects shape who we are. Like, we can think of 100 positive things or 10 positive things about a person, and their negative parts of them also shape who we are. We're born into that. Our parents have the most influence, but then also aunts, uncles, as siblings come into the family, cousins, like we are shaped by our family of origin. We always have been. And so we have to understand they have the power to shape us, but we have the power to change. And we can hold tight to things that are blessings, things that values and traits that we see in people that we go, wow, I love this. This is a part of who I am. Like, hard work often comes up. I come from a hardworking people. I really respect that. Integrity will come up. And then they'll also say, oh, but there were some really negative things. Or they'll see on a genogram that shows 3 to 4 generations up, people in their family and just basic descriptive words of them. And they'll say, oh, I don't really like that this was in our family. There was a lot of envy, or people really talk negatively about each other. Or there may even be more serious things like alcoholism often runs in families. And that's partially just genetic, but then also, I love the Hank Williams song, Hank Williams Jr., where he says, why do we drink and why do we roll smokes? And I'm not going to go through my knowing most of the words to the song, but basically he says, it's the way it was done in our family. And people will say, this runs in my family or that runs in my family. Well, yes, until it doesn't. And so with generational blessings and with the way that I do therapy, you'll see different behaviors, and you can go, and you may even pinpoint them and go, oh, that's sin. Which if it doesn't align with God, it is sin. And you go, oh, I don't want to be like that. That's not beneficial. I can still love this person and I can appreciate all the good qualities in them, but I don't have to continue with the negative qualities or behaviors. I can change, turn, repent, not be like that, and still have them in my life. And when that happens, when one person sees something that doesn't work and turns from it, we go pastoral, sin, turns from the sin, repents. We go regular therapy, changes, just sees that it's not working, so says, I'm going to change this. Then that person changes, and then as that person comes in changed, it affects everyone else because that person just doesn't do it that way anymore. And it definitely affects future generations.
Okay.
Because that's no longer how we do it. Grandma, mom, all the way, they may have done things this way, and that was fine there, but I see it doesn't work and it doesn't align with how God's calling me to live, so that behavior changes. Guess what? It doesn't happen down here.
Wow, okay.
It's not it's not the way we do it anymore. Things do not have to be the way they've always been, and you don't have to trash your entire family. You can appreciate the good qualities, yet you are empowered to say, but this is not how I want to be in this area, and you don't have to be.
Okay.
And you can do that respectfully and with love and in a way that's honoring, but it affects everything else.
Yes, okay. And the genogram is essentially a family tree?
It's a family tree. It is the coolest thing. You begin with self,
okay,
and descriptive words of self. Name, age, where you were born,
okay,
different types of, we always ask people, what type of work do you do? Because a farmer is different from a banker.
Sure.
Farmer puts on his overalls and goes out into the field. A banker puts on dress pants and goes and counts money, or, two different ways of spending their day.
Right.
Personality traits, if you've done the Myers-Briggs, we'll bring in Myers-Briggs, like what are your letters? Different interest, positive things about self, negative things about self. Just kind of getting a full picture of a person.
Okay.
And so we start there. If a person is married, then we'll go over next to their spouse because that's their next most important person. Do the same thing there. And it's your view on it, the individual who's drawing the genogram.
Yeah.
And you're not going to pass it out as family placemats or anything. So you want to ruin the holidays. This is how I see you.
Right.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. This is for your gaining a better understanding. Yeah. And so spouse, if you have children, that.
Okay.
people who aren't married yet, they would just start with self, and then they would go up and go, okay, siblings.
Okay.
And then they would do, okay, after siblings, parents. If there are step parents, step siblings, second marriages, like I've drawn these in prison.
Okay.
So I've had, literally they would say, okay, and baby daddy, and baby mama's over here, and you just draw it exactly the way it is, because it just is what it is as you're drawing one. And so you've got descriptive words, then you go up a generation, again, siblings, parents, step, all of that. I mean, these things get huge. And then up another generation, because the verse says that the sins of the father fall to the third and fourth generation. They fall, they affect. You're not being punished for it. We have behaviors that often there are consequences, and they seem like punishment. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no punishment for sin behaviors, but the sin behaviors or defense mechanisms, I've drawn hundreds of these, and by the time you've drawn about the 100th one, you go, oh, wow, everybody's got stuff, and boy, does it fall in one way or another to 3 to 4 generations. Scripture's correct. It just naturally, even if it's defense mechanisms and someone says, I'll do the exact opposite of how I was raised, they're still acting out of that, doing the exact opposite without the healing that brings real change.
Okay.
And so in that, you can easily see how things just fall. They do. This generation did it and this did it. You love the same people. You hate the same people. You don't know why you feel that way about those people.
Right.
You've never met those people.
Right.
And yet it's fallen until you can see it. And when you can see it, when you can acknowledge it, whether it be behaviors or just rules, roles, those type things in families, when you can see it, then you can go, God, does this align with you and how you're calling me to live? And if not, you can change it.
Okay.
And God's more than willing to help you do that. But I hear so often that people are cut off. I don't think you necessarily have to cut off. I believe God can empower you unless there's a very real reason, continued abuse or something like that. I think that you can change and therefore teach others how to treat you now that you've changed in a respectful way, and not by going in and saying, these are the new rules for being in my life,
right,
but just by being this different person, and therefore the system can change.
Okay. And this is like session 1. You're doing
Session
this?
1, yes.
Are you seeing patterns?
Oh, yes, always.
And are you seeing patterns between men and women?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
And even mother's side, father's side?
Yes. Yeah.
Are there some of those that you would be comfortable sharing?
Easy. Well, it's easy to see the patterns.
Okay.
It's just, and even I'll say, okay, describe your parents' marriage, because we learn to do family from our family of origin. That's all we've got. Like, we think what we grow up in is normal. And so you will often see, like with a couple, let's say in a premarital, where they're in love, they're happy, basically I'm like, those are easy. Until they get not. And then they're not easy. But I'm like, okay, this is good. And then I'll ask, okay, so describe in a few words what you saw to be normal in your parents' relationship.
Oh, wow.
Like, were they teammates? Were they best friends? Were they roommates? Were they affectionate? Were they not affectionate? Did they argue a lot? Did they call names? Like different things. You will see generationally, you'll go up to the parents, and then on one side or another, you'll see grandparents, same thing. Like, often I'll hear, dad didn't show emotion. Dad didn't emotionally connect.
Yep.
Go up 2 generations, they didn't either.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to. You'll have a family that was in the military. They've got a strong military background. We'll often see that. They will have beds made, and they will be following rules. And you'll say, well, that makes sense, because that's what you know to do. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that's going to be passed along in a family that, military background is very important too. Often you'll see in a different way, you'll see, like, if someone grew up with an alcoholic parent or a parent that had addictions and everything was out of control, go down a generation, you'll find a controlling child. Because everything was out of control.
Yes.
They had to have some form of control, so that everything being out of control in their family of origin caused them to be very controlling. And then as we gain an understanding, I love this part when I'm sitting with people, and they go, oh, they've gone up a couple of generations, and it can kind of make sense. Aha moments left and right. Like when someone draws their genogram, they just, and this is why I taught the study, because I thought everyone shouldn't have to have a master's degree to be able to see on paper, this is possibly what shaped me and what shaped the people who shaped me. And I'll see so much compassion from young people who are doing it the first time for their parents when they go, oh, my parent was someone's child too.
Yep.
And they were probably doing the best they knew how to do with what they had.
Right.
And then you go up a generation and go, oh, and they were once upon a time a child who was shaped by what they were shaped by. I'll still see people who had a grandparent that grew up in the Depression.
Okay.
And you can see the effect that had. I'm wondering what effect, like COVID, say,
totally.
Genograms later will show that, COVID changed my family in this way, or my family lived this way after 2020 or something like that.
Right.
I'm wondering how that'll affect people. But you can definitely see how, even when you look at history and times people grew up, the baby boomers, like my parents would be the baby boomers.
Okay.
And you can see a different way that they lived. If you go up a generation, you see more in the roles. Like the women did all the housework and the men did this. And then you'll see that shift down here often and go, oh no, my mom, she wanted to work and we don't know who took care of us. Like we had different babysitters and different things. And then you'll see maybe a generation down, they're like, oh, I'm going to raise my children myself. And when you look at it within the narrative that they're telling you, I've never had a genogram and been shocked.
Okay.
Even in prison.
Okay.
I've never drawn one and go, I just don't know how you ended up here.
Yeah.
I always look at it and go, well, this makes sense. Mm-hmm. When you look at what shaped a person, when you look at what they come from, when you look at the different things they've had in their life that have happened, you kind of go, well, that could have happened to anybody had they been born into that exact system and lived that exact life. And yet, by the grace of God, could be anyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Right. Oh, it builds such compassion.
Yes.
To be like, that could have been me.
Yes. And that gaining understanding, I've found, softens people's heart to do the rest of the work of healing. The study secretly is just getting you back to God.
Okay.
It lands on repentance. It lands on a reframe. It lands on forgiveness. These first weeks, the genogram, those things, it's almost like I try to stay away from deconstruct and reconstruct.
Right.
But you'll know the truth. We're deconstructing a little bit of what shaped me. We're looking at it in a healthy way. We're looking at the narrative and going, okay, it's not my identity. The genogram's not my identity. The narrative, my story's not my identity.
Yeah.
But they've all had an effect on me. We're looking at it, what did that cause me to believe to be true about God? Yep. What did that cause me to believe to be true about self?
Wow.
And what did that cause me to believe to be true about others? We even look at, because you all know you've only lived in an age where you could turn on your phone, look up anything and find it
Yes.
immediately and go, okay, I now understand this. I don't know that it's a full understanding, but you can get a definition for anything. Add that to scripture and all the arguments. And in the who God is, the goal is that they will experience God is bigger.
Yep.
God is bigger than the narrative of God. God is bigger than the life you have lived. God is bigger than your hardest circumstance. God is bigger and yet speaks through his word. And just the bringing that in and finding some healing after okay, this is what shaped me. They were just humans, because we'll make humans in the image of God instead of understanding that we as humans are made from his image, in the image of God. We'll make God in the image of humans.
Yep.
We'll make God like our father or our mother or I understand God through the lens of what the narrative I have lived. Instead of seeing God as God and all of us humans as flawed, yet those that were made in his image, who he loves, who he wants to bring back, reconciled to him. That's the goal, is softening the heart. And it's what I saw in counseling for years, is people's hearts would get soft. They would get softer towards their family. They would get softer towards themselves. They would get softer towards God. They would understand that probably that worst thing wasn't God being mean to them.
Right.
It wasn't even God at all. It was living in a fallen world, but that it wasn't God's intent just to hurt them, and that however people had let them down, that wasn't God. Those were humans, and humans can let us down. Yeah. They would get a better view of who God truly is, and then they could do some real therapeutic work from that place through the power of the Holy Spirit.
You mentioned a second ago, like how our generation, we can just Google anything.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about how therapy speak is pretty buzzy. You can essentially, by therapy speak, I mean like trauma, boundaries,
Yes.
gaslighting.
Yeah.
You can essentially get on TikTok, and if you scroll long enough, you can convince yourself that everybody in your life is a narcissist.
Yes, I was going to say
You can.
narcissist is everyone's favorite word.
Yes. I want to have a conversation both with you
Yeah.
and how you noticed this, and also how this has changed let's start with Gracie, but how
Yeah.
this has changed with the way you're communicating with clients and how they have maybe an idea of, oh, I think this thing's going on because I scroll on TikTok and there were all there's this list of 10 bullet points and it was like, well, he's on, you can kind of make it all work. I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, yeah. So I do think in our generation, I see a few trends with just having a mom who is a therapist and does this. I've seen like, okay, there's maybe two things I would say, okay, someone my age, I would encourage you to check this when you think this. So one is boundaries is all over social media. Everyone knows what it is, but not really how to set them.
Okay.
And I think that with knowing that you need them and you see you need them with your family or different relationships, you want to do that, but maybe you mistake a boundary for a cutoff. And I see a lot of people our age who their families are annoying and unhealthy, but not like never talk to you again.
Right.
And I see them totally cutting ties and be like, I'm having boundaries with my family. I'm not going home for Christmas. I'm not going to talk to my grandparents anymore. And really, you could have just set some better boundaries. You didn't have to cut them off. And I see, like, it breaks my heart a little bit because I'm like, oh my gosh, like, there should be a little bit of reverence and respect for these people did the best they knew to raise you. And I see some things where I'm like, oh man, your family did not deserve to never see you at a holiday again just because they get on your nerves or, and so I see that and that breaks my heart. So I think seeing boundaries online a lot, you think you know what it means and you think that means cut off, and it doesn't always. And so I would encourage anybody who thinks they need boundaries to read the book Boundaries or go to a therapist and ask, like, how can I do this well? Because I think just cutting people off isn't the answer, but since we don't know how to do it, but we have the word we think we need,
Yes.
you mistakenly, I've seen lots of people do this.
Totally.
And I'm like, okay, they didn't do anything that bad to you. And just because it's not fun doesn't mean you don't need to go to Christmas. And then the other one would be, so you see, if you're on TikTok or Instagram, 5 signs you're dating a narcissist.
Totally.
Like, that's
Totally.
all it is. And I would also encourage that person to get with a counselor and say, because counselors have these big books. What are they called? DSM. And it's literally a textbook. And whether you're dealing with like depression or you think someone's a narcissist or you think someone's like actually has a mental illness in your life, instead of just deciding because you looked it up that you can diagnose them, there are books and professionals where you can go and be like, I want to understand this person in my life. I think they might be this. And they have a checklist.
Okay.
Like a
Wow.
real...
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's really
yes.
cool.
And when someone
Yes.
says somebody's textbook,
That's what they mean.
their textbook.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
And if you're dealing with something, like I dealt with depression in my life, and
Okay.
I didn't know that's what it was. And my mom, thankfully, noticed it in me, and she took me, and we had coffee, and she was like, okay, Gracie, I'm not trying to break your heart, but she, like, pulled out this textbook, put it on the table,
Wow.
and read the list, like, this, and I was like, yes, yes, yes. And so then I could, like, get help from there.
Yep.
But for me, it helped me to see this is literally in a book. Okay, I have this. So then you can go from there, as opposed to just looking on Instagram and deciding. It could be any example, but I do think the narcissist one is, like, good because that's a serious term to call somebody.
Yeah, it's a serious charge.
And there are some, and I'm sure there are more now that people are so into themselves on social media. Like,
Yeah.
you might be right, but I would just say check it with a professional because that's super hurtful to call somebody a narcissist who isn't.
Right.
And yeah, I would just say, professionals are professional for a reason.
What are your thoughts on this sort of buzzy therapy speak?
On my phone, because I am a therapist.
Yeah.
Because if I have extra time, I'll turn on a Dr. Phil on Amazon.
Dr. Phil.
Amazing.
At least he knows what he's talking about and he pulls in the expert. So if I'm just going to watch something on the afternoon, I might as well turn that on and, it'd be something beneficial.
Yes.
But, the truth is on my phone, because I'm a therapist, because I think it hears us, I think we all know that, and the algorithm and all that thing, all that pops up are like psychology things.
Yes.
And so I see the word toxic or narcissist. I mean, there is an influx. And you think about it, and we didn't hear those words when I was growing up. Now, they're real, but I truly believe there is an attack on the institution of family and I truly believe our phones feed it. Like, I believe those algorithms feed it because I just don't think there were as many ads that came up 10 years ago that said toxic. Now, here's the truth. Every family is dysfunctional.
Okay.
Every family since the first family, Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, hit over the head with a rock, if that's exactly how it happened. I'm not positive. But we know killed with rock has been dysfunctional since sin. Sin that separated us from God. From that point on, every family has got some form of dysfunction. If you think you come from the perfect family, thinking you come from the word perfect makes your family dysfunctional because nothing is perfect and no one is perfect outside of Jesus. And so you bring in that we have imperfect humans in these families. I love the genogram I go from Abraham down to Joseph.
Okay.
Because I just think it paints the best picture. And you've got Jacob, who was proven to have not been a great dad, had favorites, all the things. And every kind of dysfunction you can find, yet God is faithful.
Yep.
And so this whole thing of toxic, narcissism, all the buzzwords, I would tell you be very careful. I am very careful. I purposefully, although I've had the classes I have the same degree as people who hang the plaque and take your insurance money. And so if it were my goal, let's diagnose people, I could, but I don't.
Okay.
I will see it. Now, if something meets up with the term, I'll say, let's pull out this book. I always try to think, what would I need if I were them? What would be beneficial to me if I were sitting in the chair, the counselee, the person sitting there? And so I like a good checkbook from the DSM, the diagnostic book. I like that. That's what psychiatrists use. People who prescribe medicine, those type of things. They've got them a DSM. Therapists have one also that we can look and we can reference. And so, like the time that I sat with you, it was because you were telling me you thought you were. You had all the symptoms of being. Mm-hmm. And so in kindness, I was let's just check it off or don't. When someone sits with me and they describe and they're like, oh, this one's narcissistic and this one's this, I'm like, well, let's just see. Mm-hmm. And I'll pull out the book and I'll say, okay, for everything that is true, I don't tell them how many the magic number is. Yeah. Then you hold up a finger. And then if they hit the criteria, I'll say, okay, so this person does meet the criteria of this diagnosis.
Interesting.
But let's look at, say, narcissism. A lot of people are just selfish. We live in a selfish time. We're able to be more selfish, self-centered, living in Western civilization in 2025. And so a lot of times people are just selfish. They may act in narcissistic ways. They may not show a lot of empathy. They may belittle others. There may be behaviors that seem narcissistic. But to have a narcissistic personality disorder, then it has to be a consistent, unchanging, set in stone way of being that I'm telling you is probably not going to change. The reason is that they're not going to see it in themselves and want to change because their behaviors are so concrete in that disorder.
Okay.
And so you want to be careful in calling someone a narcissist. Like, I just almost won't. I'll say, okay, meets the criteria for, because God can do anything. But with a real personality disorder, they're probably not going to want to change because it's working for them. And so it's just we see things and scroll through, and you can always think of someone who behaves in that way. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to sit with a professional and go, okay, let's see, are they just behaving in this way? Because it lets you know, how then do I deal with this person? If someone truly has a personality disorder, you're going to get exactly what that disorder has to give. So you want to behave differently, which is actually your boundary, other big buzzword, yes, in how you go about the planet in dealing with them if there's someone that you keep in your life because, say, they're a family member and you do love them. With boundaries, you also mentioned that. It's just teaching other people how to treat you. It's you having guardrails. I love the book Boundaries. You may have seen me look over. It's on my shelf. I buy them at Hobby Lobby because they go on sale a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because I pass it, I'm like, you need a Bible and they just did the best job years ago in writing it in a way that was very clear and understandable. And for people of faith, even showing where Jesus had boundaries. Not everyone was as close to Jesus as, say, the three.
Right.
There were three that were closer. Wow. And then there were disciples, and then it went out, community, and then broader. And so even Jesus had only certain people that were able to get as close to him. I like to think of it as emotionally, spiritually, and physical boundaries. And I use the example from the book Boundaries, Cloud and Townsend, that talks about it as being like a fence around your home, but the latch is on the inside, and it says, what's inside this fence is mine. What's on the outside is not, and I get to open the fence so it doesn't become a wall where I cage myself in. I get to open it and allow what I choose to allow into my life and not allow what I don't choose to allow into my life. But that way you're not building walls or cutting people off. You're instead going, this is how, and really the boundaries for you. I love when, well, I don't love it. It kind of drives me crazy. When people and I have set boundaries. I have let them know my boundaries. Well, the boundary's for you, not them. You don't have to go tell them. They don't need to know the boundary you've set. You know what you will allow. And let's say it's a phone call and you've said, I'm not going to let someone talk to me that way. Yeah. Well, when they start talking to you in whatever that way is, you say, I'm going to need to go. It was so good to talk to you.
Right.
But I'm going to need to go, and I will talk to you again here in a couple of weeks, or I'll see you as soon as we can get together. And that just ended. You didn't allow what it was that you said you weren't going to allow into your life in boundary.
Wow.
It's just, and I'm one of those counselors, I really simplify everything. I'm like, okay, they'll say, okay, this is toxic. And I'll say, let's look, what does toxic mean? Or they'll say, this is traumatic. This is called trauma, and trauma is a big word. And I'm like, oh, I can see that, but what's traumatic about it? Again, always asking the questions. And what is trauma exactly? And my mind just goes so simple. Trauma is basically something has happened and you don't have the vocabulary, you don't have the words within you to describe what it is that has happened. Now, it is traumatic. It is a big deal. But I'm like, let's find some vocabulary words where we can gain some understanding, where we can have a way of even explaining it to ourselves to the best of our ability, although we'll never fully understand, and take some of that trauma, that not having language for it because it was so painful, and give it a little language and understanding so we can at least deal with it. So I'm always almost de-escalating.
Okay.
And looking at someone come and say narcissist, and I'll go, okay, let's look at that. That may be the behavior of, and they might be. And if they are, you definitely want to have some good boundaries.
Okay.
What boundaries? Let's look at what your boundaries might be. What's beneficial to you and still honoring to others, where you can stand before God with peace. Trauma. Let's talk about it. Let's bring it to the surface. Let's not be afraid of our emotions, because God gave us emotions, but let's look at what's causing those emotions and how they might even be leading us to a place where we can now find healing. Like if something triggers a person, that's another big word.
Okay, yeah.
I think a trigger says, okay, it made me feel a certain way. Why did it make me feel that way? Let's work on that. Okay. Let's bring that to light.
I like the way you put that too, because I think some people can see words on social media or just in life, they hear them from their friends, and they don't know how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So they have the word and then they have reactions.
Yes.
But you're dealing with it. That's where it's like seems in a different way, because someone could be like, I'm triggered, and then they have their behavior because they're triggered.
Yes.
But they don't have the let me get better part, which is a good part of the recipe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I just do it at the most simple. Like God had to do that on purpose, but I'm always bringing it down to, let's just simplify it as much as humanly possible and then deal with that. And then ultimately, not as a cheap answer, but as the real answer, let's somehow get that to Jesus and get some healing in that.
You guys are clearly very close. How has that changed as you've grown older?
Okay, that's a great question because we were talking about this actually the other day.
Yeah, great.
So we are very close. I would say she's probably my best friend, up there 1 and 2. I felt bad saying that. You're 1 or 2. Like, you're my 4th best friend. Let me list them in order. No, okay, so she's one of my best friends. But what was very healthy and something that we've talked about is that growing up, I wouldn't say that she became my best friend or we even became friends until I was actually an adult. So growing up, she was mom, and she was nice to me. Like, we talked and stuff, but she was not my friend. I wouldn't have said my mom was my friend, which I think is healthy because some people are trying, they see older, when you grow up, you want your kids to be friends with you. And that's such like a beautiful part of life where you go from like, you now enjoy each other. And so they try to do that when they're younger too. And that's just not what I needed when I was younger. I needed to get in trouble. You know what I mean? And if I did something disrespectful, I needed to be put in my place. Sounds aggressive. But there were times in my life where there were character things and you were helping with God at work, but shaping the person I would turn out to be. And so I had to be, if I was disrespectful or looked down on people, it's just natural human things kids do, or I made fun of somebody. I needed a parent to set me in my place and discipline me and teach me how to be a good person.
Yeah.
Or else, what's the point in being friends with your 13-year-old if they turn out to be a crappy person?
Is time the distinction between closeness and becoming like enmeshed? And I'm guilty of using a buzzword here.
It's a great word.
I'm not a therapist, but I would say yes.
Time, like it's entering into adulthood.
Yes, I will tell you. It's so, because I always feel so being asked the questions, and yet I'm like, okay, you do have the answers. You did go to school. You have done this for almost 20 years. You have done this for almost 20 years. But the truth is, it's not the time for me to share my story, but I will tell you, I was absolutely enmeshed with my mother. And my mother was found when she was a baby.
Okay.
And she grew up in an orphanage. And it's fine for you to share that. She's fine with that, people knowing that. But she was adopted when she was 8 or 9. We're not sure how old she is. And then she was adopted by my grandmother, who was a school teacher and very classy lady, who, when my mom was 11, had a nervous breakdown and went into a mental hospital. So basically, my mother had a mother for 2 years.
Okay.
Now, she had the best. I mean, like, my grandmother was the best, nurturing, loving, wise, loved God, but just for 2 years, from like 9 to 11.
Wow.
And then she was kind of on her own again, although they kept her, but her mom was in and out of a mental hospital. And they were never close, so she didn't have that raising, that nurturing. And so I was my mom's firstborn. And so I was the first thing she ever had that you couldn't take away from her. And so we were very enmeshed. And I knew she loved me. When I was a little girl, she loved me maybe even too much. But then as I became a teenager, in that enmeshment, it became pretty unhealthy.
Okay.
And so my goal from having my children, I always knew, and I think God did this, I think it's part of his placement of me on the planet, was I knew what I didn't know. I knew I didn't know how to do family.
Yeah.
I knew I didn't know how to do it in a healthy way. And I knew it was nobody's fault that I didn't know. I knew God had been so good to us, and my mom even being adopted into that family, but that she had never had a mother teach her how to be a mother. And so when I had children, I was always asking God for wisdom. Show me how to do it. I don't want to mess them up. Help me, give me wisdom. Like, I had no clue. And I think my gift in life was that I knew I didn't. So I was always praying, and I was always reading and studying. And by the time she was a teenager, I was a therapist.
Okay.
So here's the thing. When you're a therapist, you do have the cheat notes.
Right.
You just
do. Have the textbook.
You do have the textbook. You do have the training that says be the parent. And so I've told all of my kids, I'm the best friend you ever had by not being your friend when you were young, because I was a good enough friend to be your parent and to choose to be your parent, even though that meant you didn't always like me.
Okay.
Plus, I wasn't all that healthy, so I was determined. My mom had put her emotions on me in that enmeshment, and I'd always kind of been the parent, kind of there to make sure she felt loved, although it was never her intent. So my kids would know nothing of my emotions. That was completely unhealthy in their lives.
Sure.
That they never, and that I never let them know how I was doing. So mom just had no emotions, but mom loved them and tried to do everything I could for them. So I wasn't even perfectly healthy as the therapist, but I will tell you, I repeatedly make the choice, I'm your mother. I will be your mother. You've got buddies.
Yeah.
You've got tons of buddies. You should have tons of buddies. But it's my job. It's my responsibility. God has entrusted you to me to be the mom and love you in your best benefit, which means you may not always like the answers you get from me. And so I stayed the mom, but I'll tell you, honestly, she's like my favorite person. Now, I have to add, as are her sister and brother, because I always say I have 3 favorites. They are each my favorite of them individually.
Totally.
But like that whole best friend thing, I'm like, there's no one I'd rather see than Gracie. And now that she's raised, I just love her as a person. Now, you heard me say I was always praying. I don't take full credit for how they turned out either. I think God just helped me, and God had a different plan. I know wonderful parents who they're not close to their children. They did the same things I did. I don't know how things turn out. But I think God met me in that desperate place of God help me. And then they grow up and their walk with Jesus, praise God, they walk with Jesus. My fear in being in ministry was always, Lord, don't make him turn from you because I mess him up. That was, I was always afraid that could happen. And yet God drew him closer to him, which I'm so thankful for. And so who God's made them to be, I now really get to enjoy as a friend who chose to be a parent. And then now I get to really enjoy them as friends.
Okay, my last question, what wisdom do you have for someone who's listening to this who wants to have that type of relationship with their kids?
I used to get in trouble in school. In the first time I went to school. You don't get in trouble for it in pastoral care school.
Okay.
But you do in marriage and family therapy school. I just think Jesus really is the answer. Being a true disciple, following, transformation, change, repentance, apologies, listening, do what you need to do to begin to have that relationship at whatever stage in life. If they're little, go, okay, I got a long ways here. I can pick up right here. I can do it. I can learn things. I can grow. I can follow some good instruction. There's wonderful books and resources out there. I can learn to be a great parent. I would say we did it on purpose because of that not knowing, that wanting to be a good parent. Then let's say they're older. You go, I can begin today. Let's say they're a little older, they're in the teens. You go, I've already messed up. So I think a good apology. I didn't know what I was doing, but I'm trying to learn better. And I'm seeing my role as being your parent. And I'm wanting to do this the best I can, but I'm sorry where I've let you down. Let's say you yelled yesterday. I'm sorry I yelled at you. You didn't deserve that. I think being authentic, I think being the real deal goes a long way with kids. They know when you're the real deal. It was always so important to me. And I would counsel a lot of pastors' kids. And pastors are wonderful people. They have a really hard job, and the enemy really does attack. But I was always like, Lord, let my kids know they can come up and grab my arm and I'm theirs. They don't have to wait in a line to get my attention. And let me be the real deal. Let them say she was the same as home and desperate for God, kind of same as she was when she was out speaking or teaching. Because nothing was going to matter more than how they saw me, because they see me. And God's entrusted them to me. And I would say with truth, with honesty, with resources, getting help, and letting them know this is my heart's desire. I love you. I want what's in your best interest. I'm not perfect. I've messed up. I tell them, even with all the books, I still messed up. There are still things I did that was, no one's perfect because only Jesus is. Even with everything, I know I've messed up, but there's something to that humility, yet you're still the parent, and still that I'm trying to do what's best for you, and that's heart's desire and prayer. And I think God will meet you there. I think anything is reconcilable with God. That was the whole intention of the cross. Yet it may take some real humility, apology, listening to understand instead of making a point. Sometimes if it's not going to matter in 10 years, you don't have to be right. Like you can be right or you can have relationships sometimes. Okay. And sometimes if it doesn't matter now, if it does, but you decide which battles are worth fighting for. Their faith, they're who they are. There's something that's going to affect them in 10 years. Yes. Mm-hmm. Their integrity. Yes. Whether they wear that shirt or comb their hair that day.
Right.
No.
Pish posh. Pish posh. I mean, like,
I think you need to end with our family rule too.
Oh, wow.
It's an annoying rule and it's simple, but man.
No. It was built on realness too, which we will not share. We love in this family, period. I think there's something to having a family rule. With premaritals, they'll land us, and I'll say, have us something you stand by. And often they'll say, same team. We're on the same team. With our family, we're also different, like different personalities and different and unique and yet wonderful. Like all three of my children are wonderful. My husband is a good man. I'm so blessed in those areas. The ones that are married have married great people. Now you got little grandchildren. They have their own minds and feelings and likes and dislikes, and they might melt. But if you can look for us, we just came to a point, and we weren't in an easy season.
Yeah,
we disagreed.
We love each other.
Yes.
But we disagree strongly on important subjects.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you're like, okay,
cool.
crap, I don't agree
But not
with
faith
you.
subjects.
Sure.
Not Jesus.
Not Jesus.
But other important areas.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me and I was like, but we love in this family, period.
Wow, that's amazing.
We land it right there. And so she'll look at me sometimes if someone's not agreeing, but we love in this family. Or
that's
if it's
amazing.
hard, but we love in this family. So the choice has already been made. In this family, we choose love.
Wow.
You have to act that way.
And you have to act that way.
Oh,
Yeah,
it sounds simple and easy, but you're like,
yes,
oh, crap, what does
including
love
mom and
do?
dad. Like
Of
mom and
course.
dad, rein yourself in. Remember, we love in this family.
Yeah.
You've made the
Period.
decision.
I love that.
Period. We're going to land there.
That is
So
amazing.
no matter what, we're going to love in this family.
That will be the title of this podcast for
Oh,
sure. We love this
sweet.
family. period.
That's the family rule.
That is amazing.
And it came from a real place.
Of
Yeah.
course.
I promise.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. Is there anything that you guys have going on that you want to share about?
I'll be the PR lady here.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, she didn't even tell me about
No,
generational
she's
blessing,
like,
so
she
you
just
take it.
never.
I wasn't thinking about it.
I know you weren't. Okay, so pretty much she has a Bible study that's out now. It's called Generational Blessings. You can get it at generationalblessings.study, and then also she's doing like speaking stuff, but you can follow her at Terra Tucker.